Sure. Below is section 1 of the script for your Faceless Infidelity short story, written concisely and to the point, avoiding fluff or repetition, with a minimum of 760 words. My dog, Max, started acting strange. It only happened when my husband Greg was away on business trips. Every night, around the same time, he would walk to the front door, sit perfectly still, ears perked up, and growl. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe a raccoon or a car passing by. But it wasn't that. This wasn't the usual barking. It was low, deliberate, like he sensed something was wrong. And it kept happening. Greg and I had been married for 7 years. Our relationship was stable, or at least I thought it was. Lately, things had shifted. He was colder. He didn't look me in the eyes when he spoke. The way he touched me felt mechanical. I convinced myself it was the stress from work. His travel schedule had intensified: San Francisco, Boston, Dallas, sometimes 3 cities in a month. He would be gone for days, sometimes over a week. I never questioned it. I trusted him. Max had always adored Greg. Every time he came home, Max would wag his tail, jump around, whining for attention. That changed. Now, Greg would return, and Max wouldn't even lift his head. Once, he growled softly as Greg walked past. Greg shrugged it off. "Guess he missed me too much," he said, laughing. I didn't laugh back. Something in me didn't buy it. One night, while Greg was away, Max startled me. It was just past midnight. He stood rigid by the front window, staring into the dark, teeth slightly bared. He let out a single, sharp bark, then looked back at me like he was asking for permission to act. I turned on the porch light. Nothing. No animals, no people. Just the quiet night. The next evening, the same thing. Max moved to the same spot by the window. This time, he started pacing. His eyes tracked something outside. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out. Still nothing. I began locking all the doors before bed, even the windows I used to leave cracked for air. I started feeling watched. When I told Greg, he brushed it off again. "He's a dog, Em. They bark at shadows. You're overthinking it." He barely looked up from his phone. That used to bother me, but this time it chilled me. He wasn't just distracted. He was evasive. I started keeping track. Every time Greg left for a trip, Max would react at exactly 11:58 p.m. He would sit, growl, then begin to pace. I started setting alarms just to see if it would happen again. It always did. I began to wonder if Max was reacting to something, or someone. Our neighbor, Tessa, had been friendly since she moved in next door. Divorced, mid-30s, polite but private. She often waved from her porch, occasionally stopped to chat if I was watering plants. One afternoon, I mentioned Max's behavior in passing. She tilted her head and said, "Dogs sense things. My old shepherd used to bark when my ex was cheating." Funny, right? She laughed lightly. I forced a smile. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right. That night, Max's growling started earlier. Around 11:45. He scratched the door once, sat back down, and stared out the window like he was waiting for someone. I stood beside him, watching. I couldn't see a thing. But Max's breathing changed, slow, heavy, alert. That was the first night I didn't sleep. A few days later, I picked up Greg from the airport. He looked tired, but more than that, distant. When we got home, Max didn't even come to the door. I found him curled under the dining table, ears back, tail stiff. Greg walked in and said, "Seriously? He's still doing that?" I nodded, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across Greg's face. Not concern, guilt. That night, Greg fell asleep quickly. I lay awake. Max lay at the foot of the bed, unmoving. Then, as if on cue, he stood, walked slowly to the window, and growled. I followed, heart racing. I looked out. Again, nothing. But Max didn't move for 20 minutes. Just watched. I didn't ask Greg about it the next morning. I didn't see the point. Something was happening. I didn't know what, but Max did. Whatever it was, he didn't like it. And for the first time in years, I started trusting my dog more than my husband, Word count, 769. Let me know when you're ready for section 2. Absolutely. Here's section 2 of your script, written clearly, with no fluff or repetition, and maintaining a minimum of 760 words. I started recording everything. I didn't want to keep guessing, and I couldn't ignore Max anymore. I set up a small camera in the living room, angled toward the window. I left the lights off and pretended to sleep on the couch. Just before midnight, Max moved to the window and stared outside, exactly like before. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. Max sat still for almost 10 minutes, then suddenly stood and let out one low growl. His eyes followed something I couldn't see through the camera. There were faint sounds in the background. At first, I thought it was wind or traffic. But when I used audio editing software to clean up the noise, I caught it: footsteps. Slow, deliberate. And then a sound that froze me. A woman's voice, laughing quietly. Not inside the house, just outside the window. The next day, I installed a second camera on the porch, hidden behind a flower pot. I angled it toward the sidewalk and driveway. That night, Max's behavior was more intense. He was already by the window at 11:50. As the hour changed, he let out a growl so loud it made me jump. The next morning, I checked the porch footage. My heart sank. Tessa was outside. Not walking by. She was standing at the edge of my driveway, staring at the house. She held something in her hand. At first I couldn't tell what it was. When she lifted it to her face, I recognized the bottle. Greg's cologne. The same one I had gifted him last Christmas. She uncapped it, took a breath, and smiled. I paused the video. Max had been reacting to her. Every night Greg was gone, she was outside, lurking. And she smelled like him. I tried to stay calm. I invited Tessa over for coffee that afternoon. She smiled easily, sat on my couch like nothing was wrong. I watched her closely. When I mentioned the strange sounds at night, she didn't blink. Maybe it's raccoons, she offered. Or deer. I've seen them in the neighborhood. She avoided eye contact. I offered her a cookie. She declined. She always declined. Like she didn't want to leave a trace. That night, Max acted differently. Instead of going to the window, he walked to the back door. He sniffed the bottom of the door frame, then scratched once. I stepped closer. He looked up at me, then scratched again, more forcefully. I opened the door slowly. Nothing was there, but Max didn't move. He stayed at the threshold, alert. I sat at my computer, pulling the outdoor footage from earlier that evening. I rewound to just after 11 o'clock. A figure appeared from the alley between our houses. It was Greg. He was supposed to be in Chicago. He walked casually across our lawn, then disappeared behind Tessa's fence. My hands were shaking as I clicked forward. 10 minutes later, I saw them. Tessa opened her back door, let Greg in, and kissed him. Not a quick kiss. Familiar. Intimate. I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't just betrayal. It was planning. It was routine. Max hadn't been protecting me from strangers. He'd been warning me about people I knew. I didn't cry right away. I felt numb. I turned toward Maximum. He was sitting in the hallway, watching me. His eyes were steady. I whispered his name, and he came over, resting his head in my lap. He hadn't barked. He hadn't paced. He already knew. He'd known for weeks. The next morning, I called Greg. I didn't mention the footage. I simply asked when he was flying back. Late Friday, he said. Why? I said I missed him. He hesitated, then said, me too. I hung up. That night, I set up my phone in the bedroom, screen recording everything. I turned on notifications for my security camera app. Max stayed by the front door, pacing in small circles. Around midnight, I got a ping. Activity in the backyard. I opened the camera feed. Greg was back. His flight wasn't until Friday, but he was here. He unlocked Tessa's back door like he'd done it 100 times. Max saw it too. He barked once, deep and sharp. I sat alone in the dark, breathing slowly. The truth wasn't just on video, it was alive, breathing beside me, tail twitching, ears sharp, watching over me when I didn't know I needed it. Max hadn't just noticed a change in Greg. He'd recognized deception before I did. While I second-guessed myself, he didn't hesitate. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I knew everything I had to know. Word count, 768. Let me know when you're ready for section 3. Of course. Below is section 3 of your script, written clearly, directly, and without any repetition or filler, maintaining a minimum of 760 words. The next morning, I drove straight to the police station. I told them I suspected someone had been trespassing on my property multiple times at night. I showed them the footage. They took it seriously. One of the officers mentioned they'd had similar complaints in the area, people seen near homes late at night, lingering. I didn't tell them the full story yet. I needed to confirm what I already knew. When Greg came home that evening, I watched him closely. He acted like everything was normal. Kissed me on the cheek. Said his trip had been exhausting. I asked him where he stayed. Marriott downtown, he answered too quickly. I nodded. He unpacked, showered, and settled on the couch with his laptop. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Later that night, I asked about the spare key. Months ago, Greg had said he gave it to someone during an emergency when I was out of town. I asked who. He paused. A coworker. It was nothing. I didn't press. I just remembered that detail. The next morning, I found it. The spare key, our old one, with the yellow tag, lying in the grass beside the back fence. It was covered in dirt. I held it in my hand, thinking of all the nights I had locked the doors, feeling safe inside, while someone was already on the property using a key that shouldn't exist. Max must have smelled it. That's why he always focused on the doors and fence lines. I went back through the camera footage from earlier that week. On Wednesday night, Greg had parked his car 3 blocks away and walked to Tessa's house through the alley. I found a clip from 12:10 a.m., Greg standing at Tessa's back door, her arms around his neck. They kissed. She took his hand and led him inside. The worst part wasn't seeing it. It was realizing how much effort they had put into hiding it, the quiet routines they built just under my nose. The trips, the timing, the way she always looked at me when I mentioned Maximum. All of it calculated. Planned. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw anything or scream. Instead, I printed the clearest stills from the footage, one of him entering her house, another of her holding his cologne in my driveway, and I left them on the kitchen table. I took Max and stayed at my sister's house for the night. Greg called me 12 times. Left voicemails saying I misunderstood everything, that it wasn't what it looked like. That he had made mistakes but it didn't mean what I thought it did. The usual lies. I didn't respond. I didn't owe him the dignity of a conversation. The next day, I called a locksmith. Every lock in the house was changed. Windows sealed. Alarm system upgraded. I told the police the full story now, including the camera footage, the audio, and the recovered key. They confirmed Greg and Tessa had both trespassed multiple times. There would be a report filed. It wouldn't go to court unless I pressed charges. I didn't. A week later, Tessa's house went dark. She moved out without saying goodbye. Greg texted once more, just a long paragraph filled with regret, half excuses, and desperate affection. I deleted it. There was nothing left to say. Max changed too. The growling stopped. He stopped checking the windows at night. He no longer stood by the front door at midnight. It was as if he sensed it was over. The danger was gone. We had peace again. I kept the cameras up, not because I expected anything to happen, but because I never wanted to doubt myself again. I had let instinct slip through my fingers. I ignored the unease, the shift in tone, the avoidance in Greg's eyes. But Max hadn't. Months passed. I filed for divorce. It was clean. No contest. Greg signed the papers quietly. He never asked to see Maximum. He knew better. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, drinking tea, watching Max chase shadows across the yard. I called his name. He trotted over, tail wagging, and curled up beside me. I leaned down and whispered, "You saw it first, didn't you?" He looked up, ears flicking, eyes calm. He had been the only one honest with me from the beginning. Not with words, but with presence, with stillness, with warning. He'd shown me what I refused to see. While Greg lied, Max revealed. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure from Greg. The truth had already been exposed, not by confrontation, but by loyalty. In the end, the person I had loved was a stranger. The one who stayed beside me, who growled at the lies, who waited each night to protect me, that was my family. Word count, 767. Let me know if you'd like the entire combined story or want this formatted for narration or upload-ready text. Absolutely. Here's section 4 of your script, continuing the story with clarity and precision, no repetition or fluff, and maintaining a minimum of 760 words. 6 months later, life had found its rhythm again. The silence in the house no longer felt empty, it felt earned. I had sold some of Greg's old things, donated others. The bedroom looked different now. Lighter. No trace of him remained, not in the drawers, not in the air. What stayed was the awareness that betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it stands silently at your window while you're asleep. One afternoon, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. Just a single sentence. Did he ever tell you about Portland? My chest tightened. I didn't respond right away. I read it 3 more times before deleting it. I blocked the number but couldn't shake the thought. Portland had never come up before. I opened my files, scrolled through Greg's old travel itineraries. Nothing said Portland. Then I checked one of the older emails forwarded from his assistant, a layover flight dated 2 years ago. San Francisco to Portland, then back to Dallas. The Portland stop wasn't mentioned in any conversation we'd had. That night, I pulled up a social media account I hadn't opened in months, one I'd used when I was still posting happy couple pictures, birthday dinners, vacations. I searched Greg's username. His account was private, but the profile photo had changed. A new woman, smiling with him on a beach. Her hand was on his chest. I stared at it, trying to place the background. The cliffs, the rocks, the angle of the sunlight, it wasn't any place we'd visited. Then I realized it was Oregon's coast. Cannon Beach. Portland wasn't just a layover. He'd built a whole other version of himself there. I sat back and laughed. Not out of bitterness, but realization. The betrayal was never sudden, it had been in layers, stacked quietly, until it finally collapsed. Max walked over and placed his head on my knee like he sensed the old weight returning. I ran my fingers through his fur and reminded myself that survival wasn't about erasing the past, it was about outgrowing the lies. Days later, I visited Tessa's old house. It had a new owner now. A single mother with 2 kids and a black Labrador. We spoke briefly. She said the house felt clean, like whatever had been there before had left. I smiled and told her to trust her dog. They see more than we do. A few weeks passed, and I started writing everything down. Not as a book. Not as revenge. Just facts. The timeline, the changes, the choices. I wanted to understand the pattern, to trace how small shifts in behavior, averted eyes, muted tones, unfamiliar cologne, built a full story I had missed while standing in the middle of it. One morning, I received a certified letter. It was from Greg's attorney. Not about the divorce, it was done. This was about Maximum. A request to allow visitation, claiming Greg had a strong emotional bond with the dog. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Greg had barely acknowledged Max in the final months. The only emotional bond Max had was with the truth. I didn't respond. I handed the letter to my lawyer, who assured me it would go nowhere. The next weekend, I took Max hiking. We drove out to the lake, just the 2 of us. No leash, no rush. We walked for hours, quiet and steady. He never wandered far. I watched him run through the trees and realized that healing sometimes comes not from moving on, but from standing still long enough to face what chased you. Back home, I replaced the last item from Greg's time, a cracked picture frame we had kept from our first anniversary. I hung a new one in its place. A photo of Max, sitting proudly in the yard, ears perked, gaze forward. It wasn't just decoration. It was a reminder that intuition doesn't always come with clarity, it comes with presence. With quiet insistence. With growls in the dark. Months later, I ran into someone from Greg's old office. They mentioned he had transferred to a different branch, said something vague about workplace tension. I didn't ask questions. It didn't matter anymore. His chaos was no longer mine to manage. That night, as I sat outside watching Max scan the yard like he always did, I felt it again, safety. Not the illusion of it that I'd lived with for years, but the real kind. The kind earned through awareness, honesty, and the unwavering loyalty of someone who doesn't need to speak to be heard. I didn't need to know the full extent of Greg's betrayal to be free from it. I only needed to believe what had been in front of me all along. Word count, 767. Let me know if you'd like a full compiled version, voiceover ready script formatting, or a new title suggestion.